Hello and welcome to Transfermarkt TV. I'm Manuel, Veth, he's Stefan Bienkowski, and Stefan, today's big topic is a head coach who has been linked pretty much to every single one of his former clubs, whether it's Liverpool, Bayern Munich, Real Madrid. Xabi Alonso has been linked to all of them. He's at Leverkusen, of course, and this video is mostly about why he's being linked to all these clubs, because of course he's been excellent. Leverkusen are currently second in the Bundesliga, even on points with Bayern Munich. They lost their first place by the time of this recording because of goal differential, but who knows? Maybe if you're watching to this and the next match day, that could have very well flip-flopped because Leverkusen are excellent, and it is very much down to the Xabi Alonso revolution. He took over a team in distress last season, and he's turned things around so very quickly. Both of us have written quite a lot about it throughout the entire year. Stefan, the jury might be still out whether he can replicate this at another big top club. But at Leverkusen, he's been excellent so far.
Yeah, he has. He's really kind of gone well and beyond any kind of expectation of him. Obviously, arriving at the club as, a bona fide star. He was obviously a world-class player not that long ago, really. He's only 41 years old, and he kind of played well into his 30s as well. So, he's still very much on everyone's mind to a large extent. And the move to Leverkusen was quite a surprising one. He'd only really coached the youth football, if I'm not mistaken, in Spain prior to that. He had no links with Leverkusen as well. But it was a kind of shot in the dark, and it has worked out tremendously well for Leverkusen. Alonso obviously comes with a huge degree of pedigree and experience. He's worked under Guardiola, Mourinho, Benitez, Ancelotti, the list goes on and on. His own father was a football coach in Spain as well. So he's well versed in just about any kind of style of football. But what really intrigues me is that what he's imposed on this Leverkusen side is a degree of tactics, which is very possession-based, very kind of familiar to people who've been watching the Spanish national team for a long time. So obviously something that Xabi Alonso is well versed in again. And it's worked really well because, Leverkusen have always been known as a team with very impressive technical players, but they've always kind of been a kind of yo-yo side on the pitch. It's very counter-attacking, very sometimes top-heavy, trying to outscore their opponents from game to game. And I think Alonso's kind of brought with his tactics a degree of control that has allowed Leverkusen to dominate games and to kind of impose themselves on games, whereas previous head coaches have tried to impose, a kind of gegenpressing style, which certainly scored goals and has certainly been entertaining, but I think it's also meant that at times it's maybe accentuated Leverkusen's faults, which maybe have been in central defence or in goalkeeper or whatever else. So I think that's one key thing. I think the other thing as well is that Leverkusen have kind of backed him up in the transfer window. They might have sold one star player in Moussa Diaby, but they've kept a lot of other ones, and a lot of central defenders were heavily linked with moves. They stayed put. Frimpong was linked with a move. He stayed put. Florian Wirtz, one of the kind of most intriguing players in Europe, was linked with a move. He has stayed put as well. And on top of that, they've picked up some really, really impressive senior stars. Perhaps the most obvious one to people is Granit Xhaka, who moved from Arsenal and really slotted into that team as kind of like a midfield leader, almost like a de facto captain of the club actually already. Jonas Hoffmann, who was one of the most impressive kind of wingers in the Bundesliga last season. And of course you have Victor Boniface as well, and Nathan Tella. Boniface in particular has had a really great start, really impressive young striker. So we're talking about a group of players here who are here for the here and now. They're here to win things immediately. They're not here to just kind of develop for 3 or 4 years and maybe move on to Bayern Munich or Manchester City, whatever else. It's a squad that's built for the here now, and they've got a manager in Xabi Alonso who clearly wants to win something here now. And I think the best example of that was the performance against Bayern Munich recently, Manu, where they showed that they can go toe-to-toe with the best team in the country.
Yeah, and they do it on pretty much their own terms, right? Which is, I think, was also the very impressive part about this performance at the Allianz Arena. It wasn't that they necessarily changed the style of play, and even when they faced adversity, they were managed to actually stick through it. They went down twice, and they still managed to walk away with a draw there. You go down twice in the Allianz Arena, things usually don't end well for you. For them to go there, stick to their game plan as they did, I thought was very impressive. And when you look at Alonso's Transfermarkt site, and the great thing that Transfermarkt does is that it kind of calculates by using all the formations that he has used, right? And we get these from Opta, of course. Calculates his preferred formation, which is just 3-4-3. And you see this all the time with Leverkusen. The other thing that I thought was very noticeable, a little less so in the Bayern game, but in his most recent game against Heidenheim, is that his team uses a lot of rondos to sort of create space. Of course, we've seen that in the Bundesliga with Guardiola. Man City has, of course, he has adapted his playing style a little bit at Man City because it's the Premier League. It's a little bit of a different competition, but Guardiola still uses this style quite a lot as well, and these triangles to create space between players. And I think it's very, very telling that he plays a different style of football in a league that has tended to use a very high defensive line, the high press, very physical, and he tries to teach his players to find different solutions. And the fact that it's working, that I think speaks for itself, Stefan.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it goes without saying, really. It's not often that, the Bundesliga is obviously very well known for having extremely impressive and promising young players to kind of market itself off of, and that's what people who maybe don't follow German football clue in on. But the fact that Xabi Alonso is perhaps making just as many waves as any of the young players on the pitch goes to show the buzz around him. And, inevitably we have to talk about where he could go next, because it's not just because he's at Leverkusen, but because Alonso has such an illustrious playing career and has so many ties to three of the biggest clubs in European football, that these links are inevitable. And, of course, I'm talking about Bayern Munich, Real Madrid and Liverpool. And I think it'll be really interesting to see if he can continue doing well at Leverkusen, if he can win something at Leverkusen, which, remember, is quite a novel idea at the club, despite being, maybe fourth or fifth biggest club in Germany in terms of finances. It's been a while since they've won something. And, I think we'll just have to kind of wait and see how the kind of tectonic plates of European football shift over the next 12 or 18 months, because as things currently stand, Liverpool have Jurgen Klopp and they're very happy there. The fans obviously won't be asking him to move on. Bayern Munich have Thomas Tuchel, perhaps not quite as comfortable as the Liverpool situation, but I'm sure if you were to ask anyone at Bayern Munich, they'd be happy to say, look, we're kind of invested in Tuchel, so we're not exactly going to sack him anytime soon. And then there's Real Madrid, who, there's some constant speculation as to where Carlo Ancelotti would move on at the end of this season. And perhaps that's the most likely scenario, but it really depends, when Alonso decides to move on from Leverkusen and which of those three clubs are looking for a manager at that moment in time.
Yeah, I think it's really telling that he's left such an incredibly positive impression on all three of these clubs, and that his name is being whispered in the hallways of Anfield, the hallways of the Allianz Arena, and at the Bernabeu. I think that tells you everything you need to know about Xabi Alonso, the head coach. I urge you to check out the statistics page. You can find everything you need to know about the Bundesliga, all the coaching stats, player stats, everything on Transfermarkt. So go check that out. We'll be back soon with more content. Until then, cheers and bye-bye.